All right. That was indeed a lively panel discussion. So it was quite interesting to hear what the industry experts were thinking, who are involved in designing our cities and developing the technology solutions. Most of the morning we heard from academic experts, and this afternoon it was really interesting to hear what the other side feels about smart cities, what innovations that are coming out in our region particularly, and that was a fascinating panel discussion. So we are at that stage where we must thank all our attendees who are still here. It's been a long day, but you'll feel that time you spent to sit till the end of the day is well spent, because we have Martin de Jong, who is our closing keynote speaker, who has come all the way from Rotterdam. He is the scientific director of the Erasmus Initiative on Dynamics of Inclusive Prosperity at the Erasmus University Rotterdam, which focuses on the inclusion of underrepresented stakeholders in urban governance. He is also a professor at both the Erasmus School of Law and Rotterdam School of Management, and holds a position as Fudan University in Shanghai. With 25 years of international experience in public policy, urban studies, and infrastructure development, Martin aims to make the initiative locally relevant while going global through partnerships, and this is such an opportunity. Martin de Jong has a PhD in systems engineering and policy analysis from Delft University of Technology, and has worked with institutions including University of Amsterdam, George Mason University, in Chinese cities like Shenzhen and Xiamen. His expertise includes policy, governance, urban development, transport infrastructure, cross-cultural management, and more that we're going to hear in the next half an hour or so. So with that, we welcome Martin de Jong as our closing keynote speaker, and he will be followed by Noor Nouri, and that will conclude the day. So last but no means least, Martin de Jong.
Thank you very much. I promise I will not be talking about all these topics, certainly not at this late stage. My job is to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, because the whole day you've been hearing that smart cities could be so great, but they're not. You know, they should pay attention to vulnerable groups, but it's not always happening. And they should take all kinds of ethical considerations into account, but it doesn't always happen the way intended. Now, it's my specialty to make you see the broader picture. It's my goal to show, briefly go to the next stage, to show what the broader environment is in which all these choices are made. That's an imperfect environment. But since I'm not good at making people feel like they should go home happily, actually, Neganuri will be taking over from me in roughly half an hour to give you some hope. It's not my job to give you hope, it's my job to make you feel uncomfortable, and then she'll step in, she'll talk about digital inclusion. She's actually been thinking through measures to make things better for this world. I've been publishing in the past about city labels. The term was already used. They may not be perfect, or they may be extremely ambiguous. They are very powerful. We're talking about one today, and there are many more. But in recent years, I also started considering not only these city labels, but also what role do they have to play in our broader capitalist environment. And with this term capitalism, I mean neither something positive nor something negative. It's simply a reality that we are living in, with all its pros and cons, and coming in different shapes. There are various varieties of capitalism, and they affect how we do our smart city building. When we started studying city labels a few years ago, we found something very interesting. At that moment, web scraping for city labels, not only for academic publications, but also for grey literature, was not really possible yet. So we did this based on academic literature, and we noticed something interesting, and that is that for most of the publication history, starting in 1996 when Scopus began operating until the year 2012, it was the sustainable city that worldwide had reached domination. It was a popular term for obvious reasons, because it suggests that you can be both economically and environmentally and socially sustainable, and that this triple bottom line is a good way of handling various economic and environmental and social pressures. But then something dramatic happened, as you may already have noticed. From the year 2012 on, there was another kid on the block called Smart City. And this smart city proved to be so smart that it dramatically eclipsed all the others by far. So you had the resilient city, we know it, we have heard of the livable one, the sustainable, intelligent, knowledge, digital, green, ubiquitous, low carbon, and information. 12 in those days, but the smart city was a special one. And this development continued beyond that. In this graph we show first, in the early period, how all those concepts were connected, and we saw that the sustainable city and the smart city, they had so-called a relatively low level of co-occurrence. Co-occurrence means that they appear together in the literature. The sustainable city was by far the largest and had mostly connections with other green environmental labels, where the smart city was on the other edge and more connected with the IT-related terms, such as information city and intelligence city. This picture was very different a couple of years later, when the smart city was the most popular one, and interestingly had moved much more closely to the sustainable city. And that's meaningful. It's meaningful because it means that apparently the smart city was absorbing characteristics of the environmental debate into itself, making the smart, sustainable city a perfect, label couple, if you wish. The latest picture that we made was in 2021. We already had to use a logarithmic function. You see that the smart city is over 1,000 and sustainable is somewhere around the 300. You see that many more have also appeared. There were, believe it or not, 180 city labels, 35 of which had a significant appearance. You see them all listed there. If necessary, we can, of course, share this slide with you. Here again, the smart city stands out. Now there is a message here. This message is that this city label is not popular for nothing. You can do something with it. You can make money with it. It is big business. And in the literature, not so much, but in marketing reports, you find a lot of information on what different investors expect the size of this market can be or will be. The size is not an unambiguous thing. For instance, a Navigant research scheduled that it was going to grow from 40.1 to $97.7 billion in, let's say, 10 years. The latest studies by Markets and the market research economy dramatically upped these numbers further. Now, we can say these numbers are not unambiguous or even right in any sense, because the boundaries of the smart city are hard to draw. Do you include all the access roads to the city? Do you include buildings in this calculation? Different investors make different types of calculations on this. And normally, if you're on the government side, you calculate this in a different way than if you are industry, or even if you're in, let's say, an environmental NGO. So these smart cities, de facto, have very fuzzy boundaries, and we don't know what the right figures are. Moreover, investors or marketeers do not necessarily benefit from providing very accurate information. In fact, it may be interesting for them to inflate the size of the markets to grow interest. But even if these numbers are exaggerated or imprecise, they are still extremely significant. It is a phenomenon. Now, the public image for them is obviously mixed. We've also seen this in the debate here before. Some are clearly more optimistic about what they can achieve than others. Generally, you can say they are hailed as making life more pleasant, more efficient, more comfortable, more intelligent, and also more sustainable. So we're on the right side of history here. But Opponents will refer more often to exclusion, privacy, and security issues. You know, are our data secure? Are they used for the right purposes? Can, let's say, illegal parties not access our own private data? And if they do, what will be the consequences? So there are downsides that we also find, and depending on the player and on the interest, the pros and the cons are emphasized more. So they are overall popular, and they've grown a lot, but they are not uncontested. However, if you look at the size of this market and how much we see data as the new gold here, it is an incredible phenomenon that you may want to observe from a wider perspective. Now, the wider perspective that I chose was capitalism. And looking back at history, then you can say that the first significant increase in agricultural production led to the emergence of marketplaces, and those marketplaces was already mentioned before. Why did cities emerge? It was to make exchange of products at a relatively small distance more manageable. And then it took many centuries to come to industrial revolution and to make factories the new gold. For, let's say, 1.5 or 2 centuries, they remained so until in the relatively late part of the 20th century, it was not so much the production, but the knowledge economy that came to prevail, and therefore offices was where it was all happening. You know, you didn't want to do the dirty work outside of town, or let's say in the suburbs, where the industrial parks were located. No, the smart ones would work inside offices and produce knowledge. Now with this new data revolution, you can say, all kinds of data centers, data processing organizations have more come to the fore, making the regular office workers seem like second rank. So we don't have to, but we could easily see this as a new stage in capitalist development that has significant impact on how things will be managed and produced. Now, if we want to understand operations of capitalism and its impact on smart city development, we may want to go back to the very core concept, and that is capital. And I think we can relatively safely state that capital emerged when money emerged. You know, when people had to barter, it was an inconvenient kind of exchange for products, goods, and services. So currency was invented and made it much more easy and useful to exchange. But with it came more than exchange alone, because there's always numerical value in this coin, and you can also decide to collect it. Because if it is basically the key to all other exchanges, it has a special value that all other goods and services don't have. So currency became both a tool for calculation and exchange, but also for storage. You could save something for the future. If you can always rely on this coin or this, later on this banknote to be of service to you, why not save it up? And the smart ones in those days, they decided, well, let's make use of it, let's save a little bit for now, and then make sure that we increase, accumulate this capital later on. So over time, trading emerged, banking, investment, accountancy and marketing, and a variety of economic and business functions that allowed for a safe, responsible growth of capital. And in relatively recent years, you can say that the thinking about capitalism capital has also expanded to social capital, human capital, natural capital, all these terms you know, and in my view, they exemplify that the capital thinking has gone way beyond the monetary world alone. However, this has to be, institutionally embedded. So institutional embeddedness of capital then came through a legal system with individual property rights, a widespread exchange of commodities, people no longer working at home, but basically working outside in factories to produce goods and services for profit. widespread labor and contracts for employment. We're not talking about slavery here, although some people may feel that there are aspects of slavery in it. Legally it's not. And very importantly, a developed financial system that very few people can still see through. With bonds, shares, options, and debt selling, we have introduced arrangements at the stock market that very few people still understand, and those who do can benefit a lot. To understand also what leads to smart city development, I think we have to distinguish at least 5 types of capital. Some people may even take a 6th type of capital, digital capital. For a moment I decided not to do it, but it's on the verge of being interesting. Financial capital is of course the easy one. It's simply all the coins, banknote, papers, or the next digital reckonings, making clear how much a person owns in terms of monetary value. Physical capital can be liquidated as financial capital, but in principle is, let's say, the sublimation of money in buildings, in artifacts, all kinds of things that are not money itself, but can be converted to money, and are normally physically produced, can be counted as being physical capital. Natural capital, of course, is what we name natural resources. Natural resources that in principle have a function for the ecology in itself, but that can be sacrificed at the altar of generating more financial capital. Human capital is what we can do, all the skills that we ourselves have learned, but that can in principle be converted into money. And finally, the same applies to social capital, where basically all the networks and all the goodwill that we have as people, as organizations, can be converted into money. Now, if you add all these characteristics up, you can say that by now our modes of production and consumption have become extremely complex. Very few people see through the system as it works. But they have also been highly commodified. We look at many phenomena in terms of what they are worth as a commodity, a good, a service, a person. And in many of these developments, it is natural human and social capital that have been converted into physical and financial capital. So we are almost literally eating up our planet and ourselves. That is basically the trend that you see. And this is facilitated by making everything more quantified and more monetized. We basically want indicators for things, we want to know how much we have of what, and we want to know through complex data what their impact is going to be. So measurability and monetization are phenomena, mechanisms that further drive this development. Smart cities, in that sense, are what the geographer David Harvey would call a temporary spatial fix. Investors already have a lot of capital, and they must store it somewhere. And economists would tell them you have to store them in those places where the profit maximization can be highest. So if there is a new industry emerging, and this industry emerging works with data, and data are what we need for all our decisions, then it is a very rational investment to put all those capital resources in that data development, and to bring all the producers and consumers, governments and corporations and NGOs together, individual talents, people, or human capital together to make this miracle happen. And they settle jointly in the smart city. In the smart city they come together, and therefore this is a big enclave of capital investment. In this location, data extraction, processing, and storage are key. Jointly with Negar, we have developed a schema where you can see the input and output of smart city development here. In that schema, we did not use the terms natural or social or human capital, but you can clearly see them. We consider the input, the technology push, so to say, of smart city development as human and entrepreneurial infrastructure, data, modern IT infrastructure, and financial resources. They are resources that go in to the smart city, and how you deploy these resources also influences what the animal is going to look like. Now, they are subsequently processed in a throughput, if you wish, and you see here that both the dynamic and the governance throughput are heavily reliant on ways of managing and ways of leading organizational and power processes. And then if you look at the urban needs to which smart cities are responding, the output, you see that there are different types of applications that actually we saw a lot already today. You see there is mobility, energy, healthcare, smart government, smart citizens. I'm not sure this list is exhaustive. I'm sure it can be more. What can you not use data for? But they are an example of the impact that smart cities can have. I'm now going to skip a few slides and move to the manifestations that the smart city can have, because so far we've been using this one term, but actually it is one species with a lot of subspecies, if you wish. You can, in the newspaper, you can come across the term science parks, high-tech parks, smart campuses. They are one particular type, if you wish. A type where the double helix prevails and where mostly academia and industry jointly produce knowledge, and they convert financial, human, and social capital into physical capital. It's primarily on the production side of things. Innovation districts, on the other, they are largely scaled up, but they are so much scaled up that the residential function there also appears. You can say that there's not only production of knowledge, but also consumption there, and that there is a triple helix here, because the government must necessarily also play a role. And you have financial, human, social, and natural capital being converted to this physical capital, and this physical capital then is the smart city. Looking more at the consumption side of things, you would find smart neighborhoods, where not so much the data production or processing, but its consumption through various smart applications is happening. We've developed 3 more. We also see the smart city-wide initiatives, and we describe them as approaches adopted by local governments to make smartness less exclusive, to limit it not just to a few enclaves that act as pioneers, but to make it work across the whole territory. That is not an easy task, because it requires a lot of capital to make that happen. But here you see that production and consumption are more combined, and the government has taken it as its role to make it more even, more inclusive. We identified the urban platforms as a specific form where there is mostly, the exchange happening digitally, but the consequences of the good and service delivery are observed, of course, not in the digital, but in the real world, with material consumption. And this puts a claim on space, and we therefore think it should be seen as a subtype of the smart city. The final type that we identify, the one that is often most popular in the public debate, because it is seen as most democratized or most inclusive, are the alternative city spaces where people are prosumers, if you wish, where the bottom-up people know different capabilities, different types of human and social capital, contribute jointly to developing the smart city that they like, where the data are well protected, where the type of data are generated that people want, where through open access systems, maybe buildings are designed where not commercial, but let's say civil society considerations prevail. Now, these types of smart cities exist. They are also popular. Of course, they are popular relatively more with experimental people, but they have a main weakness. And this main weakness is it's difficult for them to scale up. Scaling up requires massive financial capital, massive physical capital, and of course, also perhaps higher salaries. It also requires legal instruments provided by local governments, such as permits. If the space that you have for this alternative smart city is only a small one, and you would like to mainstream it to the rest of the city, you need industry and government to collaborate, and that proves not to be a sinecure. It's often very difficult. It may happen, examples have been described, but they invariably face this mainstreaming problem. Coming to the almost final slide. If you put it in a global context, you could say that we have varieties of capitalism here, all of which have their specific pros and cons. Now, what characterizes the varieties of capitalism literature is that it is observed that different types of markets are actually tightly interwoven. So if you have the infrastructure market or if you have the housing market, they cannot be seen separately from the education market or the transport market. They are all interconnected. Doesn't mean that they are completely dependent on each other. They are, let's say, interdependent, semi-dependent on each other. And often, if there are particular features of the role of government or industry or civil society in one, you see that also reflected in other markets. Now, if you want to, very broad brush, sketch three models here, oversimplified, admittedly, you could say that the North American model, especially the United States model, has a very strong industrial voice, a relatively weak government voice, and medium-level civil society, of which some, such as Putnam, say that is actually on the decline. But then if you look at the power relationships in a society, you can say industry has a very strong voice in America when it comes to smart city development, like in most other markets, and it is reflected in the types of products, smart city products that are delivered. The European model has a relatively weaker, call it medium-level industry, also a medium-strong government, and a medium-strong civil society. Some people would call that a corporate democratic society, where, let's say, coordination is made easier, but we also see that much of the technological innovation on the private sector is weaker than in the United States, for instance. If you take the East Asian model, then you will see that industry is medium strong, but the government has a very strong role to play in all these markets. And when you want to develop a smart city in Japan, South Korea, or especially China, you know that the government, especially the central government, also local government, will have a very major coordinating role. And it also means that the data are controlled by different players in these three models. Many of the valuable data in North America may be in private hands. Many of the valuable data in East Asia may be in public hands, or even must be in public hands. So you see that there are different pros and cons coming with these models, and it's food for lesson drawing between them, not that we can one-to-one copy each other's solutions, far from it, but it can certainly serve as a type of inspiration. Coming to the headlines of what I've just been telling you, you could say that over time an enormous amount of urban techno-branding has emerged with various city labels, one of which has come to prevail in the debate, which is the smart city. The smart city as a label has exploded, but it may not be the final word, because new thinkers in our field are already promoting the AI cities or the autonomous cities. So it could be, whereas the smart city was the successor of the digital and the intelligent city, that actually the smart city is the predecessor of a new generation of AI cities. If we had this conference maybe 2 or 3 years on, we may be using a different term. It doesn't mean that the phenomenon has totally changed. It simply means that it has obtained a new face, and that we will use different terminology. Now, all of these city labels, their use and their impact to influence public opinion are typical of 21st century capital conversion. So as we have seen, the smart city are not one thing. It comes in many different manifestations with different checks and balances between different types of stakeholders in the process. It will be interesting to observe whether the phenomena that we have described in the smart city will actually also appear in the other city labels, and to what extent and how. In this talk, I've been focusing primarily on the gaps that you wish in achieving an ethical smart city compared to the ideal, and how we can understand the institutional context in which it's happening. I will now give the floor to my colleague Nora Nouri, who is going to talk about digital access, digital